Hello, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Thank you for tuning in to this week's conversation about health content writing. I'm very excited to be with you all today and to dive into this really important topic. So, I would like to start out today's episode with a question for you to mull over. And that question is, as a pharmacist or whatever type of healthcare provider or clinician you are, what percentage of your work is actually spent providing patient education? Just if you had to ballpark it, what percentage of your work, of your time at work, of your energy at work, of your resources available at work are actually spent providing patient education? That could be counseling verbally, that could be written education, however you want to interpret it. Interpret that. What percentage is spent providing patient education? While you mull that over, I will introduce myself quickly for anyone who I might not have had the pleasure of meeting before. I am Megan Freeland. I'm a public health pharmacist turned health content strategist, and I work with digital health companies to help them create culturally relevant content strategies and develop culturally relevant content. I also run a program called Health Professionals to Health Writers, where I teach US based pharmacists and other healthcare professionals how to replace a portion of their primary income through freelance health content writing. And so, if we have not met before, really great to have you here. We have these conversations every Wednesday, so I hope you will continue to join us on into the future. So, to go back to that first question I posed about what percentage of your work is actually spent providing patient education, I also want to ask you a follow-up question. And whether you're catching this live or on the replay, you can feel free to leave your responses in the comments. My follow-up question is, what percentage of your time at work did you expect that you would spend providing patient education when you were in school? Okay, so to clarify, that first question is, what percentage of time are you spending providing patient education right now? And that follow-up question is, when you were in school, when you were a student of pharmacy or a student of dentistry or a student of public health, a student of medicine, what was your expectation in terms of how much time you would be spending providing patient education? As a pharmacist, I am kind of thinking of this with my pharmacy hat and with my pharmacy student hat, right? So I'm reflecting on what we were taught, what we were told, what we were informed about as pharmacy students, thinking about what our future careers would look like. And from my perspective, which I know a lot of my fellow pharmacists share, and you can feel free to agree or disagree in the comments, but from my perspective, I remember having a lot of information given to us, shared with us, that indicated that patient education would be a very significant portion of the work that we did in our future careers. That we would be spending a lot of time making sure that patients had access to the information that they needed to be able to understand what their medications were about, understand what they were for, understand how they worked, understand the potential risks, the potential benefits, et cetera, et cetera. And that a significant portion of our career and of our work will be dedicated to making sure that patients had access to that information. Now, I do not work as a traditional pharmacist. My background is mostly in public health, health communications, medical writing, health content writing, et cetera. But in my experiences in more traditional pharmacy settings, and based on what I know from my colleagues, from people like you who I'm able to talk with about your work and about your roles, from just kind of keeping up with the industry and keeping up with the space, I know that for a lot of pharmacists out there, for a lot of other healthcare professionals out there, you are not spending nearly as much time providing patient education as you might have expected when you were a student of pharmacy or a student of whatever healthcare profession that you were learning about. And I know that there can be a sort of like a grieving process, right? When you realize that the expectation does not match the reality. And I think that in a way, I empathize with and I respect that faculty and staff have a desire to help make sure that students feel motivated, that we feel inspired, that we feel connected to the work that we are learning how to do and to the profession that we are in the process of becoming a part of as students. But I also think that there is a responsibility to responsibly inform people about what they are stepping into and what they are committing to as a career and as a profession. I am a person, and we might all have different preferences, but I am a person where I would rather you tell me what the real is. Like, let's just have an honest conversation, right? I don't need you to BS me, to try to soften the blow, to try to make something seem like something it's not, because that dissonance and that disconnect between expectations and reality is going to be much more frustrating to me than just knowing ahead of time what I'm getting into. And I think that for faculty and staff, especially in schools of pharmacy, that there's a disconnect between what's actually happening in the industry on a variety of levels, right? Not just in terms of how much time you're spending educating patients, but largely about the profession itself. There's a disconnect between what information students are getting from faculty and staff and the real world that they're encountering when they step out of that school and they step into a work setting. There is a real difference, and that difference is noticeable. And that results in frustration. That results in quickly getting to points of burnout. That results in feeling like you are not fulfilled in your work and fulfilled in your role. And a large part of that is because what you had imagined this to be is not really necessarily in every case what it is. And this is not to say that, there are not some people who land in positions that they really love or really do have an opportunity to do some of the things that they thought they would as students. But speaking generally across the board, a lot of us are not having that experience, right? We're having that experience where you're feeling like, man, I did all of this work to get this pharmacy degree. I learned all of these things. I did all of this. I was tested on all of these patient education points and patient counseling and et cetera, et cetera. But when do I really get to do that in real life? And how frustrating is that now I feel like I've wasted my expertise, or that I'm wasting my degree in the role that I'm in because I don't get to exercise it in the way that I had hoped to, and in the way that I was prepared to, and in the way that I was in the way that I expected to. Another point of frustration that also happens is that a lot of that time that you thought you were going to be getting to educate patients, to provide information to patients, to make sure that they are connected to the resources that they need, ends up being spent like in the politics, right? Like and the back and forth with your colleagues from a different floor or from a different unit, your upper management, your administration, all of these different parties where there are all of these politics at play. And because this unit feels like their expertise is X, then your unit doesn't get to explore X because there's that back and forth, and there's that tension there. And so your role is then influenced by the politics of the organization. The reality is that the politics shouldn't come before the patients, but in a lot of cases it does. And then you as the professional are kind of stuck in this place where you are well trained, well equipped to be able to provide the care and education to patients that you can, and that you were educated to do, but you don't get to fully maximize the breadth of that experience that you have, the breadth of that expertise, because of the politics, because of the frustrations, because of the quotas, and all of these other things, all of these other layers, right? That again, you weren't necessarily prepared for or expecting. So I know that there can be a lot of frustration and feelings of lack of fulfillment in these times, because you had this picture of what you wanted to do with your career and the impact that you wanted to make, and in reality, the real picture is not quite like that. Not quite like that. Communications, okay, is one of the best ways to harness your educational skills as a healthcare provider. Whether you are a pharmacist, you are a physical therapist, occupational therapist, mental health provider, public health professional, physician, nurse, etc., the list goes on. Being able to communicate your expertise and your knowledge is one of the best ways that you can harness that knowledge and that expertise, because you are able to use it to transfer it to another person who can benefit from it and who might not have that same background as you. And the reason that I bring this up constantly every week, right? We have these conversations every week. And the reason these conversations are so important is because the actual implementation of patient care is not the only way that your skills, your experience, your knowledge are able to be used and are able to be presented in a way that is beneficial to another person. Being able to communicate information, what many of us are trained to do, right? Or have a little bit of background in doing, expected to be doing in our careers, but don't get to do as much in our careers as we thought we would. That skill is one of the best ways to be able to educate patients. And so if one of the reasons that you came into healthcare was to provide that education, then you should really be looking into communications as a way of getting more involved in that patient education process. Because as you know, the actual delivery of healthcare does not always create space for patient education in the way that it should. And so because of that, patients, the general public, they're going elsewhere to get the information they need, because unfortunately, they are not always able to get it within the traditional healthcare system, right? Within the appointments that they might have with their physicians or their physician's assistants or their pharmacists, if they even get to talk to a pharmacist on a deep level. They're not getting that. They expect it as well, but they're not getting that. So we have created other avenues for patients to be able to get the information that they need. And because those other avenues exist, we as healthcare professionals need to be leveraging those other avenues as well in order to make sure that the information that they are getting is accurate. And we can use our expertise, our experience, our background, our research skills to make sure that they are getting messages and information that are accurate, because they're acting on this. It's not just that they're reading or watching or scrolling and they're like, oh, yeah, that's cool. No, information and education influence behavior. They influence health behaviors and they influence actions. So that is a space where, and writing in particular as a form of communication, is really a space where pharmacists and other healthcare professionals can flex those patient education muscles. Now, the one thing about writing to know, and you might be in this situation as well, is that some of us have not had that deep of a level of training in writing. I know that there are different standards in communications and writing training from one school to the next. The school that I attended for pharmacy education, there was very little exposure to writing. I had some writing exposure before I even came into pharmacy school, but I know for most of us, there was very little writing training. There was minimal, it was present, but there was minimal communications training. Whereas when I was a postgraduate fellow and I was teaching drug information and literature evaluation at Purdue University, there were much more opportunities for students to write, to get feedback on their writing, basically to communicate health information in a written way. So for some of us who came from schools like that or had that type of background, you might have that type of writing experience. But for others who may have gone to a school that didn't have that type of coursework or didn't have that type of support, you might be coming from a place where you have very little writing or communication skills. And that's nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed about, but recognize that that is an opportunity for you to be able to grow and to progress in that space so that you can start to take advantage of more of these opportunities to communicate health information in written ways. And so for those who might not be familiar with content writing, or, when I introduced myself and talked about being a health content writer, that content writing is an example of this, right? Of being able to communicate health information in a written way to people who need that information. Content writing is one of a very specific types of a broader category known as medical writing and health writing. And there are certain types of medical writing that you may be more familiar with as a pharmacist, right? You might be familiar with, the medical writers who work for drug information companies or who work for pharmaceutical companies to write drug information, a lot of that writing is with an audience of fellow healthcare providers, right? So if you call up Pfizer or Bristol Myers Squibb and ask them a question about a drug as a pharmacist or as a healthcare professional, they might send you a written memo that is specifically for an audience of other healthcare professionals, right? That's an example of medical writing. People who create scientific publications, that's an example of medical writing. But this other piece of medical writing where the content is really designed for the general public and for someone who does not have that healthcare background, that is the place where I think that we don't have enough exposure as healthcare professionals, that we aren't really aware of enough, or that we don't have enough visibility into that part of the health writing world, and that we need to have a larger presence in. I really believe that more health professionals should be health communicators, and specifically should be health content writers. And the reason for that is because health content is ever present online, right? I think, like, I don't remember the statistic. I don't want to say it because I'm going to mess it up. But there's a post I made about the billions of searches that people make about health questions in Google every single year. Billions, lots, so many questions. A lot of the answers that come up in the Google search results when people are asking these questions are examples of health content. Are they all good? No. Are a lot of them? Yes, because that is what Google tries to do. It tries to provide good, accurate information that people are looking for. But not all of it is great, as we all know. And so it is important to have a larger footprint in that space from healthcare professionals who are able to contribute to the good information that's out there, to the well-researched information that's out there, to the accurate information that's out there, and to kind of flood out all the riffraff, right? All the misinformation, all the disinformation, all the bad actors. Having a larger footprint in that space helps make it so that patients are more easily able to access accurate and correct and interesting and easy to understand health information, and then act on that in their regular lives. So, in my opinion, health content writing as a form of medical and health writing as a specific type has some of the most significant potential for you to reach the general public with your expertise as a healthcare professional. And so that is why when I have these conversations about health communications and medical and health writing, that's why I harp on health content writing specifically so much, is because a lot of us came into healthcare because we wanted to educate patients. And we thought that healthcare delivery, right, being a pharmacist, being a physician, being a nurse, we thought that that was one of the only ways that we could contribute to the education of patients. But in reality, that's not the case. There are other ways that we can contribute to patient education, and that's through communications, that's through writing, that's specifically through health content writing. So hopefully this kind of helped shed some light on why health content writing and health communications in general is a really great avenue, a really awesome career trajectory for healthcare professionals, providers, clinicians who are passionate about the patient education aspect specifically. It may not be that, you hate your job and hate the setting and don't get to do anything that you want to do. You might really love your job. But it's also nice to be able to kind of add on different experiences that help you express your expertise and your professional experience in different ways. And writing is an example of a way that you can kind of layer onto whatever your existing career is, the ability to more directly educate patients and contribute to the information that they are seeing online. So again, if you have comments or reflections or questions, feel free to leave those in the comment section, whether you are catching this live or on the replay. And we will chat next week. Take care. Oh, I forgot to mention one thing, that if you are interested in learning more about the Health Professionals to Health Writers program, you can always leave a comment with the word "write," and I will be sure to send you more information about how you can sign up for the wait list. Okay, now this time I will see y'all next week.